You say there you can borrow. The government's already borrowing enormous amounts, and there is an already massive amount of national debt. And it's way more than the government spends every year, and it costs a fortune to pay the interest on that debt. So would you not put any limits on government borrowing?
Well, the first thing to say is debt to GDP ratio is at 100%. In Japan, it's 270%, and they have much better living standards than we do.
But in terms of this country, it's at the highest level it's been for a very, very long time. The financial markets are very sensitive to the decisions that the Chancellor makes. That's the case whether you'd like it or not. The UK's already got huge levels of debt. So are you suggesting that actually you'd be relaxed about the government borrowing much, much more?
Well, I think Andy Burnham was really interesting recently when he said we need to stop being in hock to the bond markets. And I think what...
And there was a market reaction.
Well, exactly. So what I think we need to do is get back to a place where actually democratic politicians who are elected by the people are more worried about the cleaners, the teachers, the nurses, the people on the ground who are actually creating the economy with their hands, rather than the people who hold these assets, who are making money while they sleep without actually working. That's deeply problematic. Now, are the markets important? Of course, they play a role, but much more important is the trust of the public on the politicians that they democratically elect. And we've gone so far the other way.
But the public didn't trust the government very much when Liz Truss completely freaked out the financial markets by promising billions of unfunded tax cuts. Again, you might not like it.
Well, Liz Truss was an absolute disaster.
But the real world that we're in right now, and you might want a completely different shape of economy, I think you do.
Yes, absolutely.
But the real world that we live in is that this country owes trillions of pounds to the financial markets, and therefore decisions that politicians take, don't they have to take them into account? You can't wish away the overdraft.
So I'm definitely not going to defend Liz Truss. I don't think anyone should. But actually, you said it really well. She was borrowing for unfunded tax cuts. What I'm talking about is borrowing for capital, infrastructure and investment that essentially creates spending multipliers that comes back into the economy. Second, though, in terms of the borrowing, a lot of that borrowing is from the Bank of England. That's money we owe to ourselves. It's not borrowing or debt in any real sense. Also, it's a lot of foreign countries who want to have that debt because actually that's a good investment for them because we have a relatively stable currency.
But before we get into, we could go down a really esoteric debate about economics.
It is important, though, because
it is important.
Can I say one other thing on that, though, on the esotericism?
Well, I want to ask you.
A household economy is nothing like a national budget, and we really need to break that metaphor.
And of course, it is not the same thing. But people look at the government in terms of what they borrow and what they spend and how they raise money through our taxation.
But we need to break that metaphor because it's a completely different way of looking at the economy, which is really important.
I just want to get a specific answer to that question, though. Do you believe there ought to be any limit on the amount that the government borrows? Would you say? Yes,
absolutely.
And where would you set it?
It depends on how many resources you have in the economy and also people who are able to use that resources. So you have to watch inflation, but that's not about how much you borrow. That's about the physical resources in a space. Once that's run out, then you're in a problem. But we're in a problem anyway because we face a climate crisis and an ecological emergency. And so we have literal physical barriers to the amount that we should be producing.
OK.